Testing. There we go. Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4.
There we go.
Yay. All right.
And the stuff you guys missed was
Yes.
probably the best stuff we've ever talked about.
What you missed was, well, first of all, I'd like to re-welcome Ronan to the show. Here, let's start all over. Take 2. It's 4 o'clock on a Monday, and you know what that means. It's time for another exciting episode of Taxi TV Live. This week, starring special guest star Mr. Ronan Chris Murphy. Yeah! Woo! So I was just asking Ronan, because he was out of town last week. He was in a cabin in the Adirondacks. I thought maybe he went off to play Grizzly Adams. But no, he was hanging out with family members.
It was.
So that was fun.
Yeah. I mean, it's great to spend time with family, especially, we're living away from family and I travel so much. So
yeah.
It's always good. And, some of the perks of new technology. Shush. Oh,
Ronan has us up on his computer. Yeah.
And some of the perks of new technology, Apogee Duet and a MacBook Pro, I'm able to actually get some work done. And
nice.
Yeah, because I've been doing a lot more of that, like a lot of more just remote work, since I'm traveling around the world a lot, a lot of different situations. Good thing is there's not a bottleneck in terms of me being able to get stuff done. So sometimes I'm in a huge analog studio. Other times I'm on a laptop with headphones and an Apogee interface. And
I got to say, I love the Apogee one. We've got one at home, and I swear, if you've got, like 8 gigs of RAM in a MacBook Pro and GarageBand, obviously, there are higher level things to use.
Yeah.
But if all you had was GarageBand and an Apogee one and a MacBook Pro with plenty of RAM, you could make a record with that.
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, I do a lot of mastering for people, and I've got this one client who's brought me 2 records. Well, I've done actually, like, of just your stories, of like 2 records of a guy who just did them all in GarageBand, and they're like genuinely great records. I mean,
wow.
we could get into esoteric arguments like,
right.
I don't quite hear the stereo separation I might have in this and that, but they're great records that I love turning up and listening to. It's fantastic music. And another of my mastering clients did one of his records were an Apogee 1, built-in microphone.
Yeah.
And he did like all the lead vocals, primary guitars, and stuff like that. So
it's a great little device.
Yeah.
It's literally like the size of an iPhone, and they've got a new version of the one, which I hear is even more spectacular, if that's possible, because I really love the old one. So before we start, we do have some questions that are already ready to go, but I want to talk about mastering because you brought it up. People used to always say to me, does my stuff need to be mastered? And my answer was typically, well, for records, certainly.
Yeah.
For film and TV, not so much. But it's getting to the point now where more and more music supervisors want stuff mastered and more libraries want it mastered. And I think that the main reason behind that is the levels are all over the place, not within a song, but from song to song.
Yeah.
I'll get stuff from just one artist with like 3 or 4 songs on a CD or in a file, and each one of them is at a different volume level. If nothing else, just bring them all up to as loud as you can comfortably get them.
Yeah.
Add a little bit of limiting just to keep them from spiking into the red.
Yeah.
And that's like the bare minimum, right?
Yeah, well, there's a couple different things, but like to libraries, one of the projects we worked on recently was we mastered a project for a library where I think we did, I don't know whether it's 300, 500 songs or something. When you get into the hundreds on a mastering project, it just all blurs out. But they had very specific idea about their needs for their catalog, where they wanted RMS levels, where they wanted sort of the amount of dead space at the beginning of it. So, so when you get into, I wouldn't worry as a taxi member, worry too much like, is it exactly right? Because if you get into the library, they'll tell you what they need, or they'll, get that done for you.
But to make sure that you get into the library.
Yeah. But one of the things with mastering is, there's the mastering side that's like, oh, it's louder and the levels are consistent. And truth is, there's good technology that's makes getting those levels up pretty easy. Mm-hmm. The one, I mean, there's a bunch that I use. A company called Fab Filter has got a new one that I've been using a lot, which is not esoterically expensive. But also mastering, and this, is a lot more than it being loud or things being consistent. So in terms of getting stuff up, like if you're going to present stuff out into the world, people kind of have expectations of level because, they might, put, maybe it's a music supervisor or something who's going to throw the 20 new things they got on a thumb drive that's going to go into their Prius while they commute across town.
And that's for people who live in LA, because if you are a music supervisor, you must drive a Prius.
Exactly.
Okay, if not a Nissan Leaf or a Chevy Volt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, so that's going to make it easier for your stuff to sort of feel, oh, it's a little more done, a little more finished, and they don't have to be turning the volume up and down. So there's that advantage. But also, again, when you get into mastering, the other side of mastering is just making the stuff sound good. Which is a different thing altogether.
But you know what? That gets dangerous.
It does.
In the hands of an amateur.
Absolutely.
And I only mean that in regard. I'm not calling you guys amateurs. I'm just saying that for people who aren't experienced, the number one requisite for being a mastering engineer is having spent gazillions of hours listening to stuff, understanding what mastering can do for it, and having great ears.
Yeah.
So you can give somebody these tools, which are awesome and readily available and pretty inexpensive. But it's kind of like if you gave me a graphics program. It would still look like crap because I don't have a good eye. So you really need to go to somebody that knows mastering other than just doing the basics. Like if you're going to just do a level match.
Easy. Somebody could train you to boost levels in 3 minutes.
But when you start getting into EQing, at different parts of the spectrum and adjusting the compression or limiting at different parts, you can create a train wreck. Can you not?
I was a full-time professional audio engineer before I felt comfortable mastering. So I mean, it was 15 years of really, learning to listen, learning to hear, getting a deep understanding of compression, having the chance to work alongside of great mastering engineers who mentored me, whether they knew it or not.
Right.
And so, but it's one of those things where, and I again take all this with a grain of salt, as I pay part of my rent by people sending me their stuff to master.
Right.
But the difference of the great men and women who master is, for me, it's really easy to listen to something and go, oh, wow, there's way too much buildup around 1.4K. Let me pull that down. And all of a sudden, when you've done this enough, and it's not that I'm a genius or golden ears, it's just I've done nothing else but this for a long, long time. All of a sudden, it's like, wow, you found that trouble spot, and the mix just blew open wider.
Right.
It just got wider, it got deeper, it got taller. The singer went from having a cold to sounding a lush, silky kind of voice. And it's sort of those sorts of things that the people with more experience can do that, when all of us, when we're new at this, can't do. So that's the benefit of having sort of the more experienced ears look at this, and you realize, it's like, wow, those cymbals are getting really harsh there, but if we do a lot of our normal tricks to pull those down, we might lose some presence, really important presence on that voice. And I'm no genius, but I battled that demon, for the first time a bunch of years ago, and have done it several times. So I was like, oh yeah, we could do that trick where we do a narrow band thing on a multiband compressor or this and that.
But it takes the time and time again experience. It's a lot like using iPhoto. You guys have probably all done this. You come back from vacation, you've got a photo. Somebody took one of the whole family in front of like a white background, and the background's actually bouncing back more light, so you lose a lot of the definition in the face. And you go into the touch-up mode on iPhoto, and no matter how long you sit there and screw around with it, it ends up looking like crap because you just don't have the experience. So
it's a great analogy because I'm a professional producer engineer, but I'm kind of a passionate hobbyist photographer for a long time. And just recently, one of my things, I did a photo down at the beach with one of the police beach cruisers and stuff, and it went out onto social media, and I actually got contacted by the LA Police Department.
Saying, like, we own that?
No, we love that. Can we use that as part of our social media campaign? And we would love to be able to hang this at the Pacific Station branch.
Wow.
I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. And I'm like, and I'm looking at it going, it's pretty good, but I need this mastered. So I actually contacted a friend of mine who is a great experienced photographer. He's sort of experienced in photography like I am with audio. And basically said, can you master this for me? So I sent him the file, and he just did some things like, bring the shadows up a little bit here, the highlights down a little bit here. And the photo was quite good. I'm really proud of it. He sent it back, it's like, oh yeah, that's the pro. Now it looks like that stuff in the magazine.
Yep.
And
That's what makes the difference.
Yeah.
So,
and not to be discouraging with this, like, because it costs money to send stuff out all the time, and especially if you're an active taxi member,
right.
every great listing you can't afford to send it out. So not to be totally discouraging, but one of the things is if you are going to be mastering your own stuff, really spend a lot of time doing that, like separate, not like, oh, I'm going to slam the stereo bus on my mixes, but spend some time going, let me just pull up different stuff I've done for the last 3 years.
Just sweep the EQ.
And master. And more importantly is really listen to other great records in the genre from commercial things.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, you just work and go, is it great? And why doesn't it have that magic? And you've never actually gone and compared your thing to something else.
And are you talking about just being on audio, or do you actually look at waveforms?
No, I would say waveforms just for a quick academic check, but the ears are so much more important. I mean, I'm not a big fan of those things that analyze and represent back to you what's going on, just because your voice and my voice, 1.7K boost, will sound different on you than me and very different on a female voice.
Right.
So they can go, if you look at yours and yours is completely askew, that's something. But really kind of listen, like say that you're doing like pop dance thing, pull up Britney Spears and will.i.am Scream and Shout and go, how bright did they make the snare drum? How far forward or far back is that voice? How big is the kick drum? How tight is it?
Yeah.
And things like that, and really look at it academically, because so many people don't spend time looking at the competition or the inspiration academically. It's like, I want it to feel like that, and
they all make not all, but many make the rookie mistake of adding presence to everything, and pretty soon you end up with a mix that makes your ears bleed. It sounds like razor blades flying out of the monitors because they've added treble to everything, probably somewhere in the 5 to 10K range, because they want each individual thing to have presence.
Yeah,
it's just
actually the thing one of the things I'm working on this week, and I'm making a short video as promo, but it's a video about, is Meghan Trainor really all about the bass and no treble?
Yeah.
Because, the big hook is, I'm all about the bass, no treble.
Yeah.
And the reality is that's a bright mix.
Yep.
And that's actually not super bass heavy, and even bass content has a lot. So I'm actually going to do a short video kind of showing people that actually there is a lot of high-end presence there. And people think, oh, I want it to be big and hip-hop or dance music, and they boost tons of bass and wonder why when their friends listen to it in their car, it just sounds like mud. It's like, well, you went all about the bass and no treble.
Right.
You didn't create a mix that was balanced and created excitement across the whole spectrum.
Yeah, people, it just takes practice.
We all do it.
But the good thing is they've got the tools at home to practice and practice and
Absolutely,
practice. Yeah. So let's take some questions from you guys. And first of all, let me get the chat room open. Hi, guys. And I want to give a very special shout out to Adriana Lisette, who happens to be from my hometown, little farm town in Illinois, very quaint. The people are lovely, and they make a great dish called a tenderloin. Those of you who live in Indiana, Illinois, or Iowa know exactly what I'm talking about. It's deep fried breaded pork on a bun. Once you have it, you'll never eat another hamburger, given the opportunity to have one or the other. Adriana, I noticed somewhere where she posted that she was going to Starved Rock, which was probably I think it's the most visited state park in the state of Illinois. And I reached out to her on Twitter, I think, and said, hey, are you from Ottawa? And she said, yeah. And the other day in the mail, I think Friday in the mail, I got a Starved Rock State Park t-shirt from Adriana. She went there the other day to go hiking with her dad. So awesome. Thank you so much. I love it. I cherish it. I'm looking at it. It's on the couch in my office as we speak, and I already tried it on. It fits great. So thank you, Adriana. That was very sweet. Okay, so some of the questions we got. This one is from Gary Halfhide. Is it possible to master a song that's been consolidated into one track and change the vocal quality only without affecting the rest of the instruments and beat, etc.? So mono, I'm guessing, consolidated into one track. I'm guessing that means
I would assume that would mean a stereo track, like when it's all together.
Okay, yeah,
that's my guess. And actually, Gary wrote me an email this morning, so I replied to that as well. But when you're doing something in mastering, everything you do is global.
Right. So meaning it affects all instruments.
Yeah. So it's virtually impossible to adjust the voice without affecting the drum, the bass, the guitars, and all that. But that doesn't necessarily mean bad, because one of the things you'll find a lot is that things that you might see as a problem in the vocal, a lot of times when you deal with that, everything else gets a little bit better. I mean, there are a few situations that are really, really difficult, especially when you have a lot of problem things happening in the higher frequencies, getting sibilants tied in with harsh cymbals and things like that.
Right.
Those are just nightmares.
Yeah.
But usually in the vocal presence, a lot of times is if you have something like the voice is feeling too boomy or too nasally or too honky, a lot of times when you go in and address those issues, it's amazing how often, wow, the guitars just got better. I mean, and one big thing I mentioned earlier, when you have too much buildup in the frequency range where there's a lot of power in the voice, when you deal with that, it's amazing how often the mix will just like blow out wide, get tall by like pulling something down a dB. It's amazing when you find that sweet spot to just pull that down, and how much that can improve everything across the board.
Do you agree with me that if you're not experienced, let's say you're a mid-level home engineer, that you're starting to get it together and stuff is starting to sound kind of like you want, because you go through phases. You go through the I don't even know where to plug it in phase, to the now I'm passing signal phase, to I can pass signal and kind of imitate what other people have done, and then you imitate enough people over enough time and you start to develop your own palette. If you will, where you are in total command of your world. So if they're at that mid-level where they're in the imitative stage, they can pass signal, they can make the meters move, sound comes out of the speakers, and it sounds pretty darn good. I recommend literally sitting there for hours with the equalizer, just sweeping it back and forth on every instrument. So because adding 700 hertz or taking away 700 hertz on different, like on a guitar, it's going to do one thing. On a bass, it's going to do another. On a snare, it's going to do another. On a vocal, it's going to do another. And then do that on all your main instruments, and then do the same thing on your stereo mix, because you just learn.
Yeah, and taking what you said further, like go ahead, like do that soloed, and on the individual instruments and in context.
Right.
Because that's the thing where lesser experienced people doing this don't understand how much stuff.
How context affects the other stuff.
Yeah, and there's like a party trick I do when I'm doing these
party trick.
When I'm teaching workshops or doing lectures and master classes around, is like playing somebody a vocal like in the mix, and it's like, wow, yeah, that sounds so boxy and dull, and then I'll put in the tambourine. All of a sudden it's a bright vocal that's jumping out. Like, what did you do to the vocal? I'm like, nothing. I added the tambourine. So again, brightening up the tambourine or pulling that back. So it's really, the more you get to understand the context of how things interrelate, the more you'll actually really start to master this stuff.
Yeah, it's the reflex is bring up the instruments one at a time and make them all sound gorgeous. But when you put them together, they sound like crap. So doing stuff in context is always better. I mean, you're going to toggle back and forth between solo, and in context. But
it's beyond the scope of what we would have time to really explain today.
That's a whole
But also,
show.
When you really start to master this stuff, like when you start to master subtractive EQ, is when you go from being, I'm okay at this, to being a badass. I mean, that's the thing. You'll see like especially older engineers talking about, you should do subtractive EQ. And it's like, well, it's not like subtractive EQ isn't something you do because, it's polite and the correct thing, like, saying thank you or please. You do it because it's badass. I mean, and when you really figure out subtractive EQ, you're like doing these things like, wow, my instruments got bigger, my mix got bigger and wider, and now I can push them louder to be more commercial and competitive.
They're not competing with anything inside the track. My personal experience was 2 years as an assistant and 2 years as a full engineer before I tackled subtractive EQ. And once you do, you go, and then you can't leave it alone. And then you start
if I could have only one or the other, if I could have only cutting or only boosting, I would absolutely take only cutting.
Yeah, because the other frequencies stay there when you drop out the garbage.
Exactly.
All right. Clyde Roberts wants to know, one problem I always seem to run into is when I have a tune mixed and I master it in Pro Tools to the best of my ability, it seems the volume isn't as great as industry standards. The VU meters in Pro Tools, for lack of a better name, are nearly peaking. So should I ignore them and push it higher? I've always been told or read that digital distortion will be the result if the meters peak even for an instant. Can it be a matter of compression, or should I just hit the more volume button?
Um, my Pro Tools doesn't have the more volume button, but I know what he's talking about. Um, one of the there's two things going on when you're comparing your stuff to commercial CDs.
Yeah.
And one, which people don't think about, is sometimes those commercial CDs sound bigger and louder because the mixers and the producers made really great choices about arrangement and how things, it's sort of like instead of like putting the huge full bright guitar over huge full keyboard,
Yeah.
you take, oh yeah, let's fat keyboard, really tiny bright guitar, and all of a sudden things sound bigger. So a lot of that is that great producers and engineers have made some really smart decisions that maybe you didn't
up
do.
a guitar or leaving an instrument out. Less is usually more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the other thing that is, especially with current things that, your CDs you're going to get from the mid 90s on have been peak limited, almost all of them. Again, peak limiting being this thing where the very short, tiny transients are knocked down, allowing you to raise the overall volume. So it's almost impossible, not totally impossible, but almost impossible to get commercial levels without doing some kind of peak limiting or digital brick wall limiting. And
meaning that it is not going to go over a certain place.
Yeah.
It's just so everything else comes up because you're stopping. Like a tambourine is almost always an offender.
Yeah.
A tambourine could show up this big, tiny little thing on the meter, but on the track meter.
Yeah.
But in the mix could really be slamming it.
And even a lot of times those transients are so fast they don't even register.
Right.
Especially VU style meters.
Right.
But one of the things I'd recommend, Clyde, if you're in Pro Tools, Massey plugins, Massey, they make a limiter called the L2007, and they have an almost fully functional demo. And it's a great brick wall limiter that even if you buy it at $69 or something like that, and I use it on a lot of my professional work, and just try using that on some of your mixes. And again, I recommend doing this not while you're mixing, but once you're happy with your mix, export that out as a file, and then create a new Pro Tools session as your new mastering session, and start trying to master in the different session. But try a brick wall limiter and see what that does, because it really is one of the important secrets of competitive levels today.
Okay. Robbie Hancock writes, I've discovered with the help of my producer that I sometimes have a sibilant vocal style when I track vocals. Well, then, don't use a 414. After trying and testing, we're moving into microphones. So trying and testing several vocal mics, Shure SM7B, Sennheiser MK4, and AT4040, I get the same sibilant result, with the 4040 being the best of the bunch, which I use most often now. I took some great advice from Michael on a previous show, angling the mic down and turning the capsule slightly. It does improve things a great deal. I've been working on my singing techniques. Just take a razor and remove the very tip of your tongue. It only bleeds for a little while. That will get rid of sibilance forever. Anyway, don't do that. Just kidding. Where was I? I've been working on a singing technique going into the mic to help with this with a vocal coach, but I find it distracting and hindering when performing to relearn how to sing. Any other thoughts or suggestions to help eliminate sibilance techniques going into the mic, or especially with EQ plugins in post? Would it be a great help moving forward? I currently use an Audio Box 22 VSL interface going into Logic X with an AT4040 most of the time. Thank you so much. Okay, so would you do it electronically? Would you do it vocal technique? Would you do it with mic technique? How do you get rid of sibilance?
Well, he's already done the best things. I mean, of trying different mics.
Yeah.
And before we read that, I was going to suggest the thing about angling mics will sometimes help with that, little of that direct sibilance. But part of it is just some people are just sibilant.
Yeah.
I mean, it's there. And if you're getting a lot of sibilance on an SM7B and things like that, it's part of your voice. And that's kind of fine. There's a lot of great musicians in the world who are sibilant, great singers. And also the good thing is contemporary productions tolerate a little bit more sibilance.
Absolutely.
But the thing I would do is, I'm more concerned about the great performance. So if I need to deal with a little bit of extra sibilant problems or almost any other problem to get a great performance, I'll deal with that. But I would record clean in, as clean as you can with the mic. Don't use any compression yet. I'm a huge fan of tons of compression on vocals, but don't do it yet. And there's a couple ways to do it. One is there's an effect, a plugin and hardware called a De-Esser. But if you're only working, like if this is your album that you're working on yourself and you've got some time to do it, one of the things you can do is go in and use one of your EQs. And the great thing about the DAW is we can automate EQs and just like use what we call a low pass filter. It's that fancy way to say the thing that cuts off the high end. And have an EQ that's doing nothing but right when it comes to that S sound, boom, brings it down. That is right around 7K.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, right when, you know, seashells, she shells or whatever, go and just pull that down. So pull that down to 5K or something like that, or as low as you can get away with. And that's going to prevent
How much would you pull it down?
spiking.
Like 3 dB, 6 dB? I mean,
I'd actually use a low pass filter. So I'd actually bring the whole filtering down. And I'd try and do that as gradual as possible, 6 dB, 12 dB per octave, because once you go much steeper than that, you're going to start getting some artifacts you're not going to like.
Yeah, it's going to also affect the breath and the overall room sound.
Yeah, because the advantage of that is that's really the best way to do it, because the problem with De-Essers, what they are is they are frequency-dependent compressors. And so that is going to make the whole S go down. We don't want to get rid of the letter, we don't want the word stop to become top. So when you aggressively de-ess, you pull down that whole S. Whereas with this trick with the EQ, we're actually going in and actually just removing the really harsh, unpleasant part of it. Yeah. Yeah. And you can also go in, you can use some, multi-band compressors where you're only using a specific band or things like that. But really, the easiest and the best, if you've got a little bit of extra time, is to try and just automate some EQ in there.
That takes a little talent, though. I hate to recommend it because it's probably my least favorite microphone on the planet, but it is one that is prone to really helping a lot with sibilance. Sennheiser 441. The square, long, skinny mic. I don't like that microphone. I've never found... they used a ton of them on Fleetwood Mac. So I became enamored with trying to make it work for me and never could. But I did find if I had a sibilant vocalist, it's got a very kind of rounded off top end on it. So
and a couple others you might want to consider. I mean, you've got a pretty cool selection of mics right there. But also, I'm a huge fan of the Shure KSM32, which again has a very forgiving top end. Also, for really sibilant singers, sometimes ribbon mics can be really good, but a lot of the affordable ribbons, which I like, it's amazing how cool cheapo ribbons can actually be. They will actually really roll off and forgive a lot of harsh top, but they will bring in a lot of coloration too. So you need to make sure you really want that coloration that the ribbon's going to bring flatters your voice.
Right, exactly. By the way, ribbon microphones, great for horns.
Yes.
Just, man, and you know what? If you can do horns, I know people love to cut every horn with a microphone, stuck right in the bell. My personal preference was put the guys in a semicircle or put them in a circle around a microphone in Omni, if you're not using a ribbon, and have them blow at each other and just get the whole thing. Sounds great. But a ribbon mic on horns always sounds good.
Yeah.
Brian,
even the less expensive ones too.
I've never tried any less expensive ones because I'm that old that they weren't invented back when I used to push faders. What are the current in reverb / delay / ambient sounds for vocals, and how do you create them? It's a complex question, but a very good one.
It's a great question. One thing that's been really in for the last bunch of years is none.
Yeah.
I mean, you listen to Katy Perry last Friday night or something. That is a bone dry vocal.
Yeah.
So when in doubt, especially if you're doing pop and hip hop and things like that, when in doubt, go completely dry. Because
it scares people, especially if you're the singer.
Absolutely.
If somebody else is listening to it bone dry, it wouldn't scare them. You scares the crap out of you.
Because the thing to keep in mind, what reverbs do, and delays as well, but reverbs more aggressively, the job of a reverb is to smear articulation and push an instrument back into the mix. So it's not good, it's not bad. It's just what they do. The job of chili peppers is to spice up your food. The job of reverb is to smear articulation and push things back away from the listener. So that's the reason, especially in hip hop, pop music, and metal and hard rock, where you want the vocalist to be right there and aggressive.
And it's all context related because other stuff will have the articulation smeared due to reverb. So if the vocal isn't, then it looks like it sounds like it's right here.
Yeah. And so, yeah, when in doubt, don't. I mean, really, the trend for a lot of stuff, things mixed by Serban Ganea, which are going to be, a lot of your Britney Spears kind of stuff and things like that, is going to be very compressed and bone dry. And so the thing is, when in doubt, that. And if you want to start sneaking into it, really do small amounts for most styles of music, like really short delays, like a single one, like 166 milliseconds, which is that slap delay. It's amazing how much just sneaking a tiny bit of that in on a separate track in parallel can all of a sudden, oh, now the voice is a little more connected to the instruments and blends, but it doesn't sound all wet and reverby. So as a general rule, you want to look for things that are a little on the shorter side, except for old style ballads.
Right.
And probably less than you think you need, because people think you add reverb to get things to start to sound pro, and that's the immediate thing where you hear something and go, oh yeah, an amateur did that, is when it's got reverb splotched all over. It's like, say they're amateur from the 80s.
or the vocalist was in the room when it was mixed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and there are a few rare exceptions, like some of Rihanna's stuff, you'll find some of her records have a little bit more reverb and delay, and I think that just comes from her sort of like Caribbean kind of thing. And of course, new bands like Fleet Foxes and stuff, where they're stylistically drench it on.
Yeah, the whole indie drenched in reverb. Some of those records offend me as an engineer. I listen to them and go, it sounds like it was done with the built-in mic in the Mac laptop, and then they just threw a ton of room on it. But it's what's happening, and guys like us that have the experience know how to get that in an instant. But it's appropriate for the genre.
Yeah, but I mean, I tend to use actually a little bit of reverb or delay. I generally start with delay and add reverb if I need it, rather than the other way around. But using a little bit. But one of the big tricks too is I recommend always with delays and reverbs. Don't put it on the individual track. Don't pull up a reverb plugin on your vocal. Bust that out into a new track and then put the reverb there. And if you don't know how to do that, you need to know how to do that. That's just,
What about if you've got a console or you've got plenty of open returns to bring stuff back to? It doesn't have to go to a track.
But I mean, just in GarageBand you can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, so you do it in GarageBand, because I mean that's just, it's not 101, it's 101.5 of engineering. Learn how to do that. And on your reverbs and delays, aggressively high pass and low pass them, because one of the things too with our reverbs and delays, it's back to those S's that we were talking about earlier. When you and all of a sudden the reverb goes, our ears are drawn to it. The listener's ear is drawn to that reverb, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, why does this sound like an 80s record? Whereas if you aggressively cut off the high end, you can still get that blending and ambience without it sounding so dated. I mean, really bright reverbs were basically American rock and pop music from early 80s to early 90s.
Rick Springfield.
But, Pearl Jam's 10. I mean, it's still all over. But, that was of the era. And if you're trying to if you have a listing, we're looking for a retro from this area, bright reverbs. If they say, we want this to sound like 1983, bright reverbs. But cut that off the top, and your ears won't get drawn to it. And also cut off the low end of those reverbs and delays so they don't get your low end too muddy.
Yeah. I used to have live chambers in my studio in Florida.
Nice.
Really great live chambers. They were the size of an elevator shaft, and they were about 16 feet tall with a sloped ceiling. Italian, what do they call that stuff? Italian plaster on the walls, and then buffed out. And we had a Bose speaker in there and a microphone on a pulley. And it was awesome. And sometimes it just got too boomy in there. I mean, we could control the decay by throwing moving blankets in there. We had a couple of gobos that we'd move in there. But one of the best things in the world was just lowering the mic, getting it closer to the speaker, and then throwing moving blankets in the corner to soak up the bottom end. It got rid of the low end buildup. And they sounded magnificent.
And one of the tricks we would do with chambers and real physical things like plates and springs, which you can totally do in the DAW, is actually put an EQ on what you're sending to the reverb.
Right.
So on that track, on that new reverb track, put an equalizer before that and try cutting off the low end and the high end before the reverb, that's a different sound than after. It's not better or worse, but it's a different sound.
A great example, snare drum. You're sending a snare to any kind of reverb, you're getting hi-hat leakage in there. So now you've got all over the chamber, whatever the chamber is. So if you cut the top end off or gate the send,
absolutely,
then you're only getting the round part of the snare, which is where you would want the reverb if you wanted reverb.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, Brian Jansen also says, is it a good or bad idea to mix while tracking? Or should mixing be saved until after tracking is finished?
It's a really good question, and I think it's kind of a preference and workflow. I personally don't like getting too tied up in the complicated part of tracking or mixing while I'm tracking. But the one thing about that is you should be able to kind of push up your faders and pan and have actually a pretty good mix right there. And if it doesn't, it means, well, what you've laid down isn't right, or you've picked the wrong snare sample or things like that. So, I mean, I'm always constantly, balancing panning and things like that, but I'm usually not going in and starting to do EQ, reverb sends and all of that while I'm tracking. Because for my own personal thing is I like to, when all the tracks are done, I like to push everything up, pan, get some levels, and really start to see what the problems are, how things are interacting. And if I've gone in and started to do reverbs and all of that early on, it might mask some conflicts later. And and to that front, I mean, even when I'm mixing, I'm trying to get maybe 70% into my mix before I add reverbs or delays, because reverbs and delays smear things and push things back in the mix. They also kind of forgive sins. So I want like that harsh, medical, operating room light. I want everything right there so I can see, is that guitar complementing or fighting the vocal? Is that kick drum working with the bass or fighting it? And going in and solving those problems, getting those relative balances. So I've got a great mix. And then if I want to start doing things in terms of pushing instruments back and forth with reverb or getting things to blend differently, I can do that. But for my own opinion, it's not advisable to get too much into starting to pile on effects and things early on, because it starts to mask what might be some of the potential problems or even potential cool things that you may not notice if you've started to smear out everything with.
Let's go back to arrangement for a minute, and let's put on producer hats. For our audience members who are starting to produce other people, and we've all been in the room, those of us who've done it professionally know that there are times where you're mixing or recording, whatever stage you're in, and the guitar part's too busy, or it just shouldn't be there. And now you've got to become a psychologist.
Yes.
Because you've got to get that part to go away, because it's going to ruin the song, it's going to ruin the mix. What psychological approach, what technique do you use to get that guitar part out of there?
Man, that's tough. I mean,
with the guitar
player.
But
actually, my training is actually in psychology. I have a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, so it's maybe why I've been able to produce records for a while.
Perfect precursor to your career.
It's a tough one. I think you kind of need to be honest in a way. And not just...
I would never recommend not.
But honest in a way of not just saying, oh, dude, that noodly thing sucks.
Right.
But looking at it and saying, hey, that part, look what's happening. Let's see how this is working with the other instruments. Let's see what that's doing to the voice. Or like, here, let's in, out, in, out.
Right. And hope it becomes obvious.
Yeah. And also even maybe the kind of thing, too, is like, okay, guitar player, keyboard players, like noodling all over the place. Look at... Where's some places we can really showcase that? Because that's a big thing too. Like I
was hoping you would say that, because that's what I used to do, was say, that's a great sound you've got going on the guitar, but it's so busy nobody's going to hear it. You should simplify it, so that they can really hear what you're doing.
Yeah, or even
now he's a genius.
Yeah, or even the busy thing too. It's sort of like you kind of say like, hey, that thing you're doing is cool, but it's stomping over the vocal. But look at that one bar turnaround we've got coming back into the chorus.
Yeah.
Let's just pull that out here so I can really slam it there. I really want to push that forward and let it be a feature, and it'll sound kind of goofy if we have it noodling and gets real loud there. Yeah. But if we let it slam in as a cool feature, as a showcase,
right.
that's going to be a great way to lead into that chorus or
which has become more important in modern day production. You have to keep the listener's attention at every point in the song because everybody is so ADD'd out. And I find that so many of the modern pop hits that I listen to now, they have hooks, instrumental hooks, from literally in the intro to the verse to the chorus. It used to be the hook was the chorus.
Yeah.
That's when the payoff came. But now they've got a tasty little lick. It might only be 4 notes, but it's somewhere up front because that holds your attention to get you to the next part.
Yeah. I don't know if you've heard this little thing called the Taxi Road Rally.
Yeah.
But I'm going to...
It's coming right up, November 6th through the 9th.
But actually, one of my workshops is just about that.
About arrangement stuff?
It's about tricks for maximum impact in productions.
Great.
So, and it really is about those things.
He teaches great classes, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. As you can see.
But it really is that thing because so many people think, oh my God, I need to spend $700 on a new microphone to get my guitars to pop. And really the reality is like, well, actually maybe what you're doing with your current gear, the way you're layering stuff or not building stuff or things like that is actually getting in the way. Because so much of the difference between great pop production, and it's the same thing too for heavy metal bands and things like that, is understanding how to make arrangements that address the way people really listen in the modern world.
It's harder for these guys, many of these guys, because they are themselves the songwriter, the artist, the producer, and the engineer.
Yep.
And so finding that objectivity that you or I or any third party could instantly find be very difficult for these guys. And why don't you address objectivity while I go warm it up in here, because even the tops of my legs are freezing. It's so friggin' cold in here. So yes, objectivity is you're everything in the room.
It's tough because it's been forever, but I'm working on my own project where I'm trying to be objective and I feel it. Artist. With me as the artist, and I feel it. I mean, I suck. I'm the worst guitar player in the world, or I'm brilliant, and that needs to be on there, even though it's fighting that great keyboard player, things like that. So it's something we all have to deal with, but one of the things is to be able to, the more and more you start to do this as a craft, especially like in a situation like as a taxi member where you're, maybe pitching things out to a wide range of stuff, is really understanding and looking at the craft. And there's one of the things I do like in my recording bootcamp programs where I basically show how similar the production aesthetic of Radiohead and Nickelback are.
Okay.
And there's usually hipsters who are just like, does not compute, does not compute. But it's the same kind of thing, because really those tricks of like getting things to be, a journey and have big impact and stuff like that is really, Radiohead is no different than Nickelback. I mean, the sort of content that they're presenting, but the way they're packaging and putting it together, it's just the same. They're doing the same tricks. They're both done brilliantly. Whether you like one or the other, they're both done brilliantly. So it's studying the craft of
like breaking out the headphones to check that out tonight.
But I mean, really, the big things is I think Follow You Home is the great example I use sometimes. Is and what they do is they introduce something and it's big and it's awesome.
Yeah.
And then something else awesome comes and that goes away.
Right.
And then something else awesome comes and that goes away. And it's like the drum sounds are bigger than God, and then the guitars come in and actually the drum sounds get small. So it's that thing of like, it's just like stagecraft in a way. Here, you're up singing the aria. You're done. Now the chorus is up. And then they shut up while the duet comes out.
I did a whole show on like the hits of the Bee Gees, which are great examples of arrangement for production.
Yep.
It was just, man, all that Bee Gees disco stuff from like late 70s through the early 80s, masterfully well arranged. Just, But everyone is a study.
But yeah, Radiohead is such a great example too, because it's, you think about a Radiohead record, oh my God, they're just so rich and dense and so much stuff going on. It's like, it's rarely more than a quartet. They just change up the soundstage on you constantly and make you think that there's rich, dense stuff going on all the time.
Oh, it's kind of like fooling the brain through the eyes. You just said make you think that this stuff is going on all the time. It's the same thing. It's tricking the brain through the ears.
Yeah, and if the drums come in and they're giant, and then they go away when the big guitars or synth hook comes in or the voice, you've already established that this is a song with giant drums. So you'll still kind of feel that, oh, this is a giant drum song, even though maybe they're little tin cans through the verse. when the big vocal has to take center stage.
Absolutely. Mark Plopper writes or asks, your favorite acoustic guitar mic setup?
I would say with acoustic guitars, 90-something% of the time, it's a single mic on the acoustic guitar.
I'm a fan of that.
Yeah, it's when you're doing acoustic guitars, you can have, if you're using multiple mics, you just label one like acoustic guitar mic and just name all the others phase problem mic 1, phase problem mic 2, and it takes a little too long to get into all the whys of that. But a single mic, and it's usually a large diaphragm condenser.
What's your default? What do you start with?
It's a Perlman TM1, which is a newer model similar to an old U47 with a little bit brighter on the top. So it's a big tube, I think they're $1,700 or something.
Okay, what would your at-home inexpensive $200 mic be?
Well, actually, let me back up even more and say that my two most common mics are that one and a Shure SM57.
Okay.
Shure, it's usually one of those are my two kind of go-to mics. Right. And people kind of laugh like 57, oh, that's crazy. It's like, try it. Try your dynamics. I mean, because I'm a huge fan of dynamics, and also for a couple $100 with dynamics, you get into some of the best microphones ever designed and built. And condensers, it's a little bit of a minefield when you're down there in the lower price point. Yeah. So it's usually one of those, a large diaphragm condenser, or a dynamic, something like an SM57 or EV-RE20. The thing about the dynamics is, one is they just can sound great, and they're $100. Mm-hmm.
And you can use them for a hammer.
Exactly, and good for voice, and then snare drum, and all those kinds of things. But the nice thing about dynamics is they tend to articulate a little bit better in a denser arrangement. So if you've got big rock guitars or organs, the dynamics,
of the bump, the higher upper mid-range bump in them,
little bump, and there's just something about dynamics that are just a little more muscular and solid. So they'll kind of cut through and fight a little bit better. Whereas our gorgeous condensers will sort of wash and lush, and it's like, oh yeah, it's lovely. And it's like, yeah, but this is a monster truck rally. You put big drums in an electric guitar. This is a monster truck rally, and so that lush and hear the subtle nuance of this and that will kind of get bulldozed. So
makes perfect sense. So what you're saying is think about the song and the part you're going to do before you pick your microphone.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Because if you're doing Eagles, Lion Eyes, 4/4 silky strums, you would probably choose the condenser.
Yeah.
If you're doing Jack and Diane by, what's his name, John Mellencamp, you might want to use a 57 and compress the piss out of it.
Yeah, but like the one thing is, if you've got a couple mics around, especially recording at home, the advantage you have of recording at home is you're not paying somebody else by the hour to do this stuff. So take the time. Try every mic you've got, the most expensive one you've got and the cheapest one you've got, and see which one feels good. Because again, I've done like this kind of folky Americana records with acoustic guitars prominent and not getting buried, where a low-cost dynamic mic has just beat every other mic in my collection. And I've got a commercial studio and a pretty good collection. So yeah, don't rule out your low-cost dynamics, because you probably already have them, and they can sound great. The one thing I try and avoid most of the time is be really careful of kind of low-cost condensers with aggressive top end, because a lot of the cheaper condensers will have aggressive top end with a lot of phase shift, which will get really unpleasant on those top few strings of that. And also, if you're going to be on the other end of the spectrum, like a ribbon mic, which is fun, make sure that's really the sound you want. Because I love ribbon mics, but again, they tend to soften and disarticulate a lot of the top end too. So if you want a nice shimmer, the ribbon's going to be the wrong.
And think about the source. A lot of people, I would say most people, never consider the gauge of the strings they're using on an acoustic guitar. Depending on the part, depending on the octave, depending on where you want it, if you can envision where you want it down the road. I hear a lot of stuff where I'm pretty sure that the producer, the engineer, the guitar player, somebody in the room said, go with a thicker gauge string. Sometimes it sounds like they're even old strings. Because it works well for that like indie folk thing.
Absolutely.
You don't want the shimmer.
You
want to sound a little more wooden.
And one thing that's huge, massive thing is pick. If you're playing with a pick or plug, the density of the pick.
Yeah.
And, you know, you may think I'm joking about this, but the density of the guitar pick, you know, thick to thin, is a much bigger difference than the, you know, the mic pre on your $99 interface and a $2,000 Neve preamp.
Yep.
You know, that difference between those two is like, oh yeah, I can hear this. But the difference between, you know, thin pick and thick pick, you know, any non-musician, non-engineer could go, oh, that one's like sparkly. I like that one better. Or that one's, oh, boomy and warm or whatever. But yeah, I've got a huge box full of guitar. I probably have 100 guitar picks in my studio. You know, every time, especially at a trade show or whatever, like for something to rally, you know, they'll have the little free promo guitar picks. Take them.
Absolutely.
And put them in every time I see one. You know, you're at a club and somebody left one on the stage. You know, grab it, pick it up, build up your collection, because it's a much bigger difference than mic preamp or converters. I mean, you want to get the best you can whenever possible, but that's such a huge thing. And also, just try moving. Again, here, having the guitarist here and then moving here, or moving the mic across, like 1 foot this way or 1 foot this way, is a much bigger difference than a $2,000 Neve versus a $99 M Audio mic preamp.
This goes back to, you know, give me an Apogee one and a Mac laptop, and I can make a record, because I've got enough experience to know to move that mic.
Yeah, and also
most people just don't even think that. They're busy thinking about gear. Everything is a gear solution.
Yeah, and also, again, like a taxi member who's really prolific and like chasing listings and things like that, where you just got to grab the guitar, let me see if I can get this in by noon tomorrow. You've got what you've got. But if you're working on like an album or production, whether it's your own thing or you're producing for somebody else, you know, if you live in a musical community, you know, ask somebody to borrow their. If you know somebody's got a really nice guitar. Again, there'll be musicians who are real virtuosos, are really used to their instrument. You can't change that out. But if you're doing a nice strummy kind of thing into a pop song, man, the difference of a great guitar, not necessarily an expensive one, but, oh, that guitar always sounds great. Well, you know, 6-pack of really nice imported beer.
Yes,
I'll leave this with you if I can have the guitar for the afternoon. And we're all music people. I mean, people generally like love to be a part of that and be like, oh, great, can I come hang out at the studio? Because getting things right at the source. I mean, people who come from our generation are yapping about that all the time, but it's just so true.
But that's our generation. Nowadays, everybody, you know, we live in a quick fix society where people want, you know, they want to push a button or click something and have it be better.
Yep.
Rob Shirelli actually came up with a plugin. I think he sells for like $15, and it really is very, very simple. And you like push a button, turn a knob, and things really do sound instantly better. And he created that because people were always asking him, you know, what do you do to get that magic sound? So he literally sat down with a programmer and figured out, okay, this is the combination of stuff that I do. Most frequently, it's my default thing. I think some of you guys watching the show have it. I forget what it's called, but it works. But it's not for everything all the time. What do you think of the whole left, center, right only mixing thing?
Yes. It counts for about 90% of things I do.
Yeah.
And what, if you don't understand, means basically when you're panning something, panning all the way to the left, all the way to the right, or straight up the middle. I mean, I know a lot of mixers like, you know, multi-platinum, like Hit Machine guys who don't do anything but that.
Yeah.
And that's my default start, and there's a lot of records I do which are nothing but that. But, you know, it's not a moral thing. If I'm doing something and, you know, the tambourine really needs to be off here to separate it from the hi-hat or blend it a different way, or guitar solo out, I'm happy to do it. So it's not like, you know, I feel like I'm being a bad person if I get out of those three. But it's amazing. When I first started doing it, it felt so weird and awkward because, like most people, I'll put my guitar sort of here and the voice there, and you fill up the spectrum, and that was kind of normal for me. But then I kind of just started, you know, mentors, you know, teaching me and things like that, going, oh no, we're boom, boom, boom. I'm like, there's no way. And I started doing it. It just seemed freaky to me. And now it's actually weird for it almost to not be that way. You know, I'm mixing a record and, you know, the client will be like, I don't know if the guitar should be all the way. Can we bring it over there? I'm like, yeah, okay. But it's a great, great way to start your mix. Again, many just hit machine mixers are doing nothing but that. But really, do as much as you can, hard left, center, right, and make as many of the elements in your mix mono.
Yes.
Again, if you do hard left, hard right on that stereo synth, you've just smeared out the middle. That, you know, that stereo acoustic guitar, you've just kind of made a smeared out wobbly.
Yeah.
But when I'm making a record, mixing a record, there's usually not more than 2 stereo things in the mix, including the drums.
Right.
You know, maybe 3, but that's kind of, and sometimes nothing. Sometimes drums, everything else mono.
Down the middle.
Because when you build something with and I mean just mono individual instruments, so a single guitar mic, boom, panned out to the left, out to the right.
Right.
Because when you build a mix, the thing is, mixes built out of lots of mono elements sound huge in stereo.
Mm-hmm.
Mixes built out of a lot of stereo elements sound like wobbly mono.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, once you get into this, it might feel awkward at first, but it just gets so much easier to like, wow, it's big already. It's like, well, because you've eliminated a lot of the things that are, you know.
Jeff Emmerich told me either before or after last year's Road Rally. Jeff Emmerich, for those of you who don't know, the Beatles engineer on most of the Beatles stuff, told me the best way to listen to the Beatles, and it's a marked difference, is listen to the mono mixes on vinyl.
Mm.
He said, So I was in a movie theater the other night, and they were actually advertising the Beatles box set vinyl in mono.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. Mark Plopper also asks, what's your favorite electric guitar mic setup?
I'll try whatever I need, but it's amazing how often the Shure SM57. I mean, the Shure SM57 is the most popular electric guitar mic of all time without a hint of competition.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that there aren't 20 others that are awesome and you might like as much or better, but there's a reason when you go from, you know, Slayer to Steely Dan.
Yeah.
And it's that. I mean, I don't usually, I really like dynamics for electric guitars. So there's, you know, Sennheiser 421 if you want something a little brighter and more aggressive. EV RE20s if you want something a little fatter and rounder. But it's amazing how the a Shure SM57 in the right place will get you what you need. And a lot of people think, oh, it's too bright or it's too fat. And, well, it's usually somebody who hasn't taken the time to really move it around the speaker and find that sweet spot. And both the electric and the acoustic is go into the best microphone preamps you can. And I don't want to say this in an elitist way, like you need to have fantastic high-end esoteric stuff, but
it won't sell one more record.
But it might make your job a whole lot easier. Yeah. I mean, the great thing is great mic preamps make all of your mics sound better. So that, you know, $69 cheap import condenser you've got and your $5,000 Neumann, they all sound better with great mic preamps. And a lot of times some of the cheaper mic preamps will kind of actually harm the audio going in and won't do it any sort of favors.
You've also got to learn how to push your preamp, too, because all preamps seem to have a sweet spot.
Yeah.
And that's dynamics dependent, instrument dependent, octave dependent, all that stuff. But as a really broad general rule of thumb, I found that most mic preamps sound best, you know, like at 3/4 or 2/3, up in that range. You're giving enough coming into it that it makes the circuitry work better. So it just sings a little more. Is that just me, or do you find that as well?
Yeah.
I mean, it's very rare that I would have a preamp at like 2.
Yeah, and it kind of depends also on the style. I mean, there's some where you really, they want to be worked hard to get the tone that they're known for.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're so right about the sweet spot. This, I think, in some ways too, it's almost with the cheaper stuff where you don't want to work them too hard. Again, you know, if you paid $140 for your interface, it's not going to have great mic preamps in it, and they usually don't want to work that hard, and they'll start to develop hiss and things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's finding that sweet spot. I mean, I'm a big fan of like quad 8 style mic preamps, which is old consoles. Which
these guys don't even know what you're talking about.
So there's a company called A Designs. They make a few. The Pacifica is probably the mic preamp I use the most.
Okay.
And I've got original old quad 8s too, and they're like, I've got Neil Young's old quad 8s, which are pretty cool. But one of the tricks too is like if you've got lesser stuff, there's these things that are basically microphone level boosters.
Yeah.
Cloud Cloud Microphones makes one called the Cloud Lifter, which is 99 or $149, and Triton Audio, I think New Zealand or something, about $99. You put them between the mic and your mic preamp, and power them with phantom power, and they basically will give you about 20 dB of really good clean boost. So if you've got kind of cheaper mic preamps, you can sort of offload some of the heavy lifting.
So you're not overdriving the front end of the preamp. Okay.
And I even use that on some of my lower output. If I'm using a low output mic like a Ribbon or a Shure SM7, which is an amazing mic but a low output, I'll actually even use those in front of my $2,000 mic preamps and stuff like that to bring the level up and match the impedance a little bit better.
I've just drifted back to Quad 8 land, and do you remember Quad 8 once made a cardboard fold together console at one of the AES shows? I mean, I'm a little older than you are, but there was an AES show probably around 76 or 77 where you could get this thing and you would fold it together and it looked like a Quad 8 console. It was like, as a kid, I always wanted to have a baby elephant that was like this big, you know? Having a miniature Quad 8 console was exciting to me. The miniature Quad 8 or the baby elephant? Let's see. Here's one from Joe Capalbo. How do you get a better vocal performance? Is there anything you can do in the mix to help this? It sounds like two things, but let's stick with the vocal performance.
It's more one than we might think.
Okay.
I mean, actually, I'll address the second one first.
Okay.
Because there's a couple of things. One is your mix will actually affect your vocal performance a lot. Not only just, you know,
because you're hiding it or you're featuring it.
Well, no, and I think we're talking about headphone mixes. Or maybe I'm not.
Joe, are you watching the show? Because I'm a little unclear.
And I would guess we'd be talking about headphone mixes to get better vocal performances. Which, even if it's not, it's something good to tell them about.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, Joe can tell us if we're wrong and we'll shut up. But yeah, one of the things is you want to get somebody a good vocal mix, almost whatever it takes for them to get, you know, be into it and excited and things like that.
Right.
A couple of things you want to be careful of, though, is I usually don't start piling on delay or reverb unless the artist really needs it and really wants it. I'll usually give them their voice coming back dry because a lot of reverb and delay can be inspiring in some way, but it also, reverb and delay hide sins. And so it's actually a lot harder for people to get good intonation and sometimes even get their rhythmic phrasing as good and as solid if they're drenched out in reverb. So I usually by default don't give that to them. If they ask for it, I have no problem sneaking some in.
Do you always have people work with one side of the cans off?
I have them sometimes do that. I have them sometimes both cans on, and I do a lot of vocals with no headphones at all. Just cranking up the mains in the studio and letting them rock out.
And using the rejection on the back of the mic. So the speakers are blowing at the singer's face, but the back of the microphone has the most rejection.
Yeah, with a cardioid. Using a cardioid mic, especially like a cardioid dynamic. I sound like I'm here as being a dynamic mic sales guy today. but dynamic mics will generally have better rejection.
Yeah.
Which is why we like to get them in on drums and voices. But yeah, a good dynamic microphone, cardioid pattern, it's amazing how much it will actually reject from the speakers. If you know I'm here singing and the speakers are over there, and
so this is really handy to know for those of you guys who have home studios and you're singing at your console. Presumably the speakers would be in front of you, facing the back of the mic. You know, you don't even have to think in terms of somebody on the other side of the glass. Do you remember the old trick with taking the oratones and putting them out of phase?
And I every once in a while I goof around with those, but at the end I just don't need it. And there's a gag I do, and this will be no fun if you come to one of my 6-day recording boot camps, because now I'm telling you the gag. But what I do is I actually do this vocal performance where I blast the speakers and I hold a condenser mic in my hand and I lean over the console with the speakers blasting and sing into it. And then when people hear how usable that is, their jaws are just like on the floor.
Because they're looking for a pristine environment. oh my gosh, I can hear the air conditioner.
Yeah, and people think like, oh my God, I couldn't do that. It's like, well, it's good enough for U2, and they're the biggest rock band in the world.
Yeah.
Most of the U2 stuff is a Shure Beta 58 handheld with no headphones.
Yep.
And they sold a couple records. So record that way, and you'll get a deal with Apple.
Yeah, there you go. That's one way to make big money on a record these days.
Also, a couple things too to keep in mind for performance, like intonation. We get a lot of our pitch reference from bass frequencies, so make sure they've got enough bass in the headphones. And also, if the voice is too loud in the headphone mix, people have a tendency to sing a little bit flat, and if the voice is too low, people have a tendency to push a little bit sharp. So really trying to find that sweet spot can be really helpful. And then just, try and focus on the positive. When you're trying to coach a vocalist, don't harp on the things they're doing wrong. Harp on the things they're doing right, because, we all need some wind in our sails.
And this is the one time I'm freakishly in love with being honest. And it gets me in trouble sometimes, but there's one time that I'll lie like a mother. And that is when you are getting the levels. Always say to the vocalist, we're just getting levels. I'm just working on the sound. Have them do 3 passes, and you'll get the 3 best passes out of them because they won't give a damn.
It's so
They
true.
will give you the performance of a lifetime, and then say, okay, now we're taking some takes, and then play them back, the first 3 and the last 3, and they will inevitably choose the first 3.
Exactly.
Every time.
And when you're just getting set default, make sure your levels are conservative.
Yeah.
Because clipping your input on your DAW is one of the few things you can do to lose a performance of a lifetime.
Yep. Not that I work on DAWs, but clipping anything.
But probably 99% of those guys are, yeah.
Where was I? Let's see. Joe Capalbo again. What would your FX chain be for lead vocal? Plug-in suggestions?
Some of mine's a little esoteric, but conceptually, probably the first thing I'm doing is subtractive EQ. I'm going out doing subtractive EQ to usually pull out boominess from the low end I'm not going to keep, and also finding things in the mid-range where things get pinched or honky or nasally. Usually, again, just finding 1 or 2 spots in the mid-range that aren't pleasing. And that's kind of, once you train yourself to do it, you can even just kind of, push up an EQ and sweep it back and forth. And you don't need to be a super experienced engineer to go, that sucks.
Right. It'll be incredibly obvious.
And a little less of the stuff that sucks.
Yeah.
And then pull that down. And that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm always compressing vocals a lot.
Yeah.
And then it's not uncommon for me to use 2 or 3 different plug-in or compressors in series. I actually, in my workflow, I tend to incorporate a couple hardware ones, but there's some records where it's all in plugins.
Yeah.
And especially for less experienced people to get into it, an LA2A style compressor, which electro-optical if you're being geeky, but
it's not that geeky. In the old days, it wasn't that geeky.
Yeah, exactly. But the great thing about the LA2A style is it's so easy to use. If somebody can walk you through it in like 40 seconds,
right,
and you've mastered it.
It's just
how much you want to do, gain makeup,
right?
and the truth is, I've been doing this full time for a couple decades now, and I still use them all the time because they sound great and it's hard to mess them up.
Right.
So I'll usually do like some, often one like that. I mean, the Empirical Labs Distressor is kind of a piece of hardware that's part of almost every record I do.
Yeah.
But even without that, like looking at something that'll do just some nice global squash, and then maybe something a little bit more aggressive. So even in your easy to find plugins, something like an 1176 style. And both of those two I mentioned, there's tons of emulations out there in VST and Universal Audio and Waves.
Do you find that they are close to the actual box? Do you like the LA2A? Do you find that the software version of it sounds pretty close? Because I've not used them.
They're getting better all the time.
Yeah.
So they'll start to give you some of the compression characteristics. The thing about the hardware where some of us will tend to lean on it still is hardware is just easier. It's easier to tweak sounds in hardware in terms of like you close your eyes, spin. It's like, wow, that actually sounds good. Where
Right.
plugins make you be a little bit more articulate about getting just that right spot.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a sense when I lean on the hardware, it's usually to get a sense of bigness and mojo kind of things that's different than what I can get in a plugin. And I use plugins all the time, part of virtually every record I do.
Yeah.
But it's usually when I go out and lean towards on the hardware. It's I want a bigness, mojo, or to do things more aggressively.
How many tracks would you say you have well, first of all, what types of records do you typically work on, or is the range complete? I mean, could you literally be doing like, EDM one day and indie folk the next day?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I don't do a lot of straight EDM stuff. I listen to it a lot as a fan, but in my particular, but like when I was just this last European jaunt, just got back from, I went from doing kind of an acoustic folk rock record, all analog, 2-inch tape, analog console, mixing down to an old Studer tube 1/4-inch, and the record I started.
My heart beats still. Yes.
And the next record I went right into is, a dance pop record with a lot of world music influences.
Yeah.
And I try really hard to always be doing that because it keeps me challenged and interested. I mean, because I've made hundreds of records at this point in my life, so I'm still in it for the love of it. So I'm always trying to do new things to challenge me and give me new experiences and perspectives. And so there's a few kind of ranges I don't do a lot of work in, but I'm always I've done tons of jazz, I've done tons of chamber music, extreme metal, and I love that aspect that I've been lucky enough to have that particular weird career.
I had a similar career in that I got to do like 100-voice choir with an 80-piece orchestra in the church with the second largest pipe organ in America.
Nice.
And found that it just sounded better with a stereo Sheps way up by the ceiling than it did using all the individual mics.
Yep.
So I was very fortunate. There were times where I recorded a Japanese koto band. There were times that I got to do, just stuff that other engineers only wanted to make rock records. For some reason, I got called out on a lot of mobile stuff and loved that.
Yeah.
Because it makes you a better engineer for the rock stuff.
It does, absolutely.
What's the most successful song produced on Taxi? That's from Corey Gillette. We don't produce songs, but if you're talking about what's the most successful thing to come through Taxi? Certainly Buy Me a Rose, Kenny Rogers. That was forever ago. I Loved Her First by Elliott Park went to #1. What was the band? I can't think of the band. A great hard rock band, and I can't think of their name. But they had a platinum album through us with a single that I can't remember that was a hit. Kiss Me by...
Crossfade?
Who was it?
You mean Crossfade?
Crossfade, thank you. Crossfade, that was the hard rock band. They were actually really, really good.
Yeah.
Who did Kiss Me? Sixpence None the Richer. They couldn't get arrested. Their record was out. They couldn't get arrested. They came to us for film and TV stuff. We got them, I think, in Dawson's Creek, and it just blew the record up. So that kind of stuff. Dean Crepane, I think, had a big European hit with Stephanie Heinzman, I believe, who is a Dutch artist. Juliet Padu asks, I recently learned about a technique, I think, usually when mastering, can't remember what it was called, where one compresses the center of the stereo field to a great degree. I think she meant to a greater degree than left and right. How often do you employ this technique? So compressing the piss out of the middle and leaving the outside alone, or
Yeah, mid-side.
Yeah.
And mid-side is not only compression, it's also EQ, which I haven't done since this morning.
Or a mic technique.
Which is similar concepts, but how you get there.
Yeah.
But it's good to have in your bag of tricks. I don't use it a lot, but a lot of times there's times where you might have like especially center information like aggressive kick drums or snare drums that when you start compressing those to get level or particular tones, like everything just starts to sort of come down and maybe get dull, or maybe even pump a little bit too much. So the techniques are you can like compress the center information kind of independently of the outside, so you can bring those down, but like the outsides, which might be your big rock guitars like on a Green Day style record or something like that, where the kick kick and snare are getting brought down, which of course the vocal is going to pump a little bit with that, and your guitar still stays solid. So a way to get something to be bigger or more aggressive, or if you've got something you've got a real outlier, like something panned off to one side that's really way too loud, you can actually go in, or like something dynamic off on one side, you can go in and compress the sides a little independently to keep those in check without, your bass and your kick and your stuff right in the middle.
Makes sense.
Going up. But yeah, mid-side is really cool if you don't use it or don't have your head wrapped around it. Don't let that stop you at all. I mean, because it's for me personally, it's a small part of what I do.
Like 1% or less?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and when we start getting into some of the mastering aspects, problem solving, you're going to do it. But I would say most records I'm not doing significant MS stuff on in any way, shape, or form. Some other great engineers are different than I am on that front.
Okay, that's it for the questions I had. Did you have some that people...
Well, let's see, did some...
Oh, you want to take some from the chat? Okay. Talk about multiband.
Okay. Multiband is... hey, Brian, I haven't talked to you in a long, long time. But
right.
Well, multiband compression is something to be careful of. And what multiband compression is doing is it's splitting the audio signal up into 3 or 4 different bands and then compressing them all independently. It's really rare in my personal work that I use all of those bands. A lot of times if I'm using a multiband compressor, I'm using more of a band-specific compressor. Like, oh, there is a problem happening in the extreme lows or in the high or something in the mids where just that band needs to be treated. So I'll use them for that. The things to be careful of is when you're splitting those and then regrouping them together, you're starting to induce phase shift. And anybody who's had to put up with being with me for days in training, it's like, okay, enough of the phase already. I'm like, nope, not enough of the phase already.
But they don't even put mono buttons on 90% of the gear anymore.
Exactly. But yeah, understanding phase and how it affects you is a huge thing.
But you should check everything in mono, and they don't have mono buttons.
Yeah. Which is absolutely true. But even these are inducing phase shift across the whole stereo spectrum. So you start to introduce some problems, and also it can be kind of really exciting, like, oh wow, it's louder and bigger. But one of the things is in modern styles of pop and rock production, the end result isn't dynamic. I mean, stuff is just flattened out. And one of the things where we get a sense of dynamics is actually in spectral shift. When they start digging into the guitar harder, it starts to get brighter. So even though our modern style of production has it go like this, we get a sense that it's getting louder. If we've used a multiband compressor, all of a sudden it's starting to dig in more, get brighter, but our multiband is pulling that back down. So all of a sudden we lose that benefit of now things are starting to feel like they get louder or more excited and aggressive.
You have to be in my opinion, you have to be a fairly advanced engineer to be working at that level and working with multiband, because it's more dangerous than it is helpful in the hands of the wrong person.
I would generally avoid it. I mean, if you're not just really confident sitting down, if you're still kind of that point where I still feel like I'm a lot, where I'm like, oh, how's this going to work?
Yeah.
But generally, I would avoid it. And really pull out the multiband when you have a very specific problem to address. Again, I've got friends and great engineers who have a different perspective on this than I do, but I really recommend that the multiband is this tool you've got in your back pocket when you need it to address a specific problem, to bring it out to address that one problem.
You know what it works great on? Believe it or not, harp.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Because you've got a lot of transient spikes in very different ranges.
Right. Like a bass string on a harp is going to be completely different than something above the middle octave on a harp. And multi-band compressor works really well, especially if you're in a situation where you have to close mic it. Normally, if I were going to do a harpist solo in a room, I would mic it from probably 3 to 6 feet away, and just hear the whole harp in some of the room. But
and one area where I do use it sometimes is addressing, like, as one of my potential tools for sibilant singers, especially if I have to work fast. The one we talked about early in the program is still a much better way. But if I'm working fast, I'll set up a multiband compressor that only has one band, like from maybe 6.5K up, that just gets pulled down with a sibilant. So I'm still getting a little weird phase shift going in there, but it can be a good workaround and sometimes better than a de-esser for preserving intelligibility in stuff.
Somebody obviously from Europe or Asia saying, good morning. Is there a safe, happy medium for determining sound quality? As in, songs sound different on everything from car and home stereo, computer, etc. How could I decide what the happy all-over sound level is? I hope that makes sense. I actually don't know what I'm doing, but I'm enjoying doing it. That's like most of it.
Exactly.
We just fake it. You just that's what being a pro engineer is, faking it well.
It's a really good question and something we're always still trying to wrestle. All of us, even who do this a lot. And the term you'll hear, we'll talk about how does something translate. And that's usually our geeky nerd way of saying, is it going to sound good on the car and your iPhone and your laptop and your hi-fi stereo? The best thing you can do is, one, just listen to as many things as you can. You know, the old, let's take it out to the car, let's take it out, do all of those things. But also, I think what's even better in a way is spend a lot of time listening to music you love as a student. And so if you're listening to one of your favorite sounding records in your room, what does it sound like where you sit down and do the work?
Yeah.
Wow, is the bass thin and tiny? Is it big and boomy? Is it this and that?
Right, because that's what matters, where you're going to do the work.
Yeah, and so you get to understand how it's going to translate. I mean, like the great master, I mean, Chris Lord-Alge, you know, his stuff translates so well. It's amazing, which is why he's the most successful mixer in the world. But the funny thing is, like, if you're on a really, really good system, his stuff doesn't sound good, but he doesn't make records for those people. He actually, a lot of times if you're on great speakers, like, wow, that's really harsh. But like the crummier your playback, his stuff sounds like $1,000,000. So
that's because most people listen on crap.
Yeah, and which is why he's so successful and so brilliant at what he does. But the best thing you can really do, I think, is really listen in different places, but really get to know records you love. And that's what I do. I mean, I travel a lot.
Bring your reference with you.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. I kind of call them, you know, like my North Stars. And for me, like my my main North Star, there's a record by the Tragically Hip Canadian band called Trouble at the Hen House.
All right.
And wherever I bring that in the world, I can put that on in the studio I'm about to do work in, spend some time listening to it. Go, oh, that's how the low end extends. That's where it cuts off. Oh, this is, if I listen, because I know that record's just like tattooed into my brain. And so if I listen to that and going, wow, this sounds harsh compared to what I know that when I'm starting to make mix decisions on the record I'm working on, I can look at it and reference. And it's not that I'm going to try and make my record sound like that record, even though I probably am. I just but
it gives you
that calibrates. You know, my head calibrates to the room I'm in. Yeah. So, and there's also like a couple records. Ones I carry, again, a Chris Lord-Alge thing, the first Daughtry record, Chris Lord-Alge mixed, and brilliant, but man, it's so bright and aggressive. And Incubus's Morning View. And I do a lot of rock stuff. I do a lot of different things. But it's sort of like Incubus's Morning View is just this huge low-end mush. It's gorgeous. But if I'm mixing a record and it's bigger and boomier in the low end than that,
right,
I'm making a statement. And if I, you know, and if I pull up like that Daughtry record, which is brilliantly done across the board, and if my mix is brighter, more aggressive, it's like, I'm really making it's so like those two are like goalposts. And to me, that Tragically Hip record is kind of like right in the middle, and with like boom, boom, boom. It's almost like, that's the range, so I know, oh, that's where I am. And I'll make my own artistic decisions with the artist on like how aggressive we're going to be, how fat do we want to be. But no, if I'm outside the goalposts, we're making a statement.
I always listen to Asia by Steely Dan because that's tattooed on my brain. So I know when I listen to that in any room what the issues are.
Yeah, so find one of those, find a couple of those records, whether you're into pop country or jazz or EDM or whatever. Find some of those records and just, listen to them everywhere you can. Get them tattooed into your brain. And it's really going to help.
All right, one more question. I got to wrap it up because I've got to work on a couple of listings before we walk out of here at 6 o'clock tonight. MM Steely Dan. what's your go-to comp for vocals, and what do you use? And do you use more than one instance of it on a bus?
Yes.
Oh, compressor. What's your go-to compressor for vocals, and do you use more than one instance of it on a bus? Good question, Danny.
Yeah. Again, mine are hardware, but you can do kind of similar things. Again, it's a distressor from Empirical Labs. It's just so part of what I do with vocals. And there's unfortunately not an exact plug-in of that, but to get some of that aggressive type sound, some of the 1176 type things can do the trick. But also, I mentioned them earlier, the LA2A style compressors are so easy to use and so good and so musical and so forgiving that a lot of times one of those, and then usually somewhere at the end of the chain, I've got some kind of really fast compressor or limiter to grab little spikes that jump out. But one thing that's even more important, and with Pro Tools 10 and up if you're in that world, but you can do it other places, try and deal with levels before they hit your compressor.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got, somebody who sang quiet in the verses and screamed in the choruses, don't use a compressor to try and make up that difference. I mean, that makes sense in a live gig, but not a record.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do is actually go in and take those loud choruses and just pull them down.
Mm-hmm.
And I work off of Pro Tools, and we just use clip gain for that, but you can use a gain controller, any different way to do that. So get your levels kind of evened out using just simple gain, and that way you're going to be able to hit your compressors in a more controlled way.
Right.
Because a lot of people think about, oh, compressor, that's just the thing that squishes the dynamics, or yeah, sort of, but the more and more you do this, the more your compressors are your paintbrushes. Part of what I'm doing is to compress things for altering the envelope.
Mm-hmm.
A big part of it too is like where things naturally fall off on the voice, I want to compress that vocal to get a bit more consistent. Not that I want to ruin the dynamics, but I want to bring up the low-level content. I want to hear that note when the voice trails off at the end.
So what you're saying is control the source, and don't only think of the source as the voice out in the studio aiming at the microphone, mm-hmm. but think of the source as now you're in mix mode, the source is what's on tape.
Yeah. And so really when I'm thinking compressors, especially when I'm starting to chain up compressors, mm-hmm. is it's tone and mojo. So mm-hmm. I'm really going for those. And one particular ones for tone and mojo is, that's the thing, why you might choose one versus the other, mm-hmm. because you want to bring some of those characteristics, bring all of that kind of stuff into the table. But yeah, for heavy lifting of reducing dynamics, a gain control, a fader's better at that.
Oh, nobody does that anymore.
Better compressor in the world. So yeah, I recommend, again, might even do things like where there might be a syllable that jumps way out.
Yeah.
I'll actually, beginning of my mix stage, myself or my assistant that works with me will go in and, even just scale some of that down so that when we're hitting our compressors, it's for fun envelope shaping, right. Mojo and tone.
Well, with that, we need to wrap it up, or we're not going to have any listings going out tomorrow. Thank you all for watching. And how many? Well, I'm not going to ask how many are coming to the rally. I got to tell you, I spent all day Saturday finalizing a lot of the booking of panelists for the rally, and one that I'm particularly delighted that's coming is Tracy McKnight, who is an incredibly good music supervisor. She's the vice president of the Guild of Music Supervisors. She's worked on 121 films. She was vice president of music at Lionsgate for a pretty long time. I want to say like 7 or 8 years. And she was so gracious, and she's so excited to come to the rally and meet you guys and contribute to your knowledge base. So I was just really delighted with our little email exchange the other day, because she's got the rally vibe, but she hasn't even been there yet. So I hope that you guys, are coming to the Road Rally. It's coming up in a little more than 3 weeks, if you can believe that. So if you want to book your plane ticket, you got to get on it now. We are still ahead of registrations from last year. The hotel is almost sold out at this point. And Ronan, are you doing 2 classes this year?
I'm doing 2 classes, I think, mentoring, and I love the rally. So I go for as much as I can. So usually I stay all day into it. So like if you've got a lot of these questions, I just love getting to meet the members and hang out. So you can come hit me up with questions there, recordingbootcamp.com if you need to hit me up for other stuff.
I actually Yeah, I gave a link to your site this morning.
Oh,
Not
awesome.
but
yeah, I mean, the rallies just, we love doing it. So
Yeah.
we go, love meeting everybody. So I'm teaching a few classes, doing some mentoring, and usually kind enough to give us a table at the bookseller's room. So we hang out there.
Great.
Just love just talking about this.
And hanging out at the bar, buy him a beer, ask him a question. That's, all right. Thank you all for watching. We will see you next week. I have no idea what I'm doing for next week's show, but I look forward to seeing all you guys and seeing many of you in person in just a couple of weeks. Until then, say goodbye to Mr. Ronan Chris Murphy.
Thanks, everybody.
And we will see you soon. Bye-bye.